Namaskar and welcome to EKA. I'm your host, Shruti Deora. EKA is a place to learn yoga, pranayam, and meditation from India. We have a mobile app and we also organize daily meditation classes on Zoom. Please check the video description if you'd like to know more. Today, we talk about integrating brain science and meditation. And to talk about this topic that gets me all fired up, we are privileged to have with us an accomplished neuroscientist, Dr. Marjorie Woollacott. Marjorie is an Emeritus Professor of Human Physiology and member of the Institute of Neuroscience at the University of Oregon in America. She's the president of the Academy for the Advancement of Postmaterialist Sciences and the research director for the International Association of Near-Death Studies. Marjorie received her Ph.D. in neuroscience from the University of Southern California, has published more than 200 scientific articles, and written or co-edited 8 books. Her most recent book, Infinite Awareness, has won several awards. This book beautifully combines her research as a neuroscientist with her insights and self-revelations about the mind's spiritual power from decades of her meditation practice. So a very warm welcome to you, Marjorie. We are delighted you could join us today.
Thank you, Shruti.
Wonderful. So, as a trained neuroscientist and a meditator for decades, I think we'd love to start with hearing more about your life, your spiritual journey over the past many years.
Sure. And I may start, as I did in my book, with an experience I had when I was 5 years of age, when I was a little girl and my mother happened to have killed a gopher, which was digging tunnels all through our front lawn. And it was lying there on the front lawn. And I had this incredible desire to see what was inside. And so I got a little kitchen knife from the kitchen and I opened it up and I was like amazed to see all these like glistening little packets of organs and things like that inside. And I realized that that moment probably was a reminder of where my career would probably go in the future, into neuroscience and understanding who we are in terms of human beings inside. So that was the start of it. And I then went on to get a graduate degree, as we said, a PhD in neuroscience, because I was very intrigued by the brain and in fact, what the brain was. And, at that particular point, when I started my university career, I said, do we have a soul? And if so, where would it be? And maybe it would be in the middle of the brain. I didn't know. And then as I took all my graduate courses, I became more and more materialistically oriented, as my teacher said, no, there is no God. This is just a material universe. And I accepted that. And so I then, for the next probably 10 to 15 years, I was simply doing my research, trying to work in rehabilitation neuroscience to help, for example, children with cerebral palsy learn to stand and walk better, and to also help people that were older adults learn to keep their function into old age. And I had a lot of graduate students working with me on new therapeutic techniques, things like that. But then in 1976, when I was about 30 years old, I had an experience in meditation that changed my entire view of reality. And in this case, what happened is that my sister, who had been a meditator for a number of years, invited me to a meditation retreat given by an Indian meditation master in the Catskill Mountains of New York. And she said that it would be, a way that she could give me a present and also have me experience some of the things that she experienced. And I remember coming skeptical because I was a scientist and I didn't really know about meditation, whether it seemed effective or not, but I was curious. And so I remember on that first morning of the meditation retreat, we were told that the Swami would come around and initiate every individual there. And the initiation was described as a spiritual awakening that would happen through the Swami's touch. Now, clearly, again, I was skeptical, but since I was there, I decided to put my skepticism aside for the weekend. And besides, I was really curious to see what might happen. And when the Swami reached me, he touched me right between the eyes and right between the eyes and on the bridge of the nose. And I could feel at that moment something that felt like a current of electricity go from his fingers down into my head and down to the very center of my chest. And I could feel the exact point where it stopped. And it was my heart, not the physical heart, but more like a heart than my physical heart had ever seemed. And at that point, I began to feel this energy radiating out from the heart. And it radiated through my whole being and beyond. It felt like love and pure joy flowing through me. And the words that came to mind, I realized had nothing to do with scientific analysis. They were, I'm home. I'm home. My heart is my home. And what's most amazing to me was that experience then transferred into my regular life. When I went back home the next day to my university position in Virginia, I got up spontaneously at 5 a.m. in the morning to meditate. And I did that day after day after day. And in fact, it's never ceased. I meditate every single day right now. And I did it knowing that just beneath the surface of my awareness, there seemed to simmer this quiet ecstasy. And I realized I could tap into it through meditation and therefore actually experience a very different awareness in my life.
That's beautiful. And I think it is, aren't we all glad that you kept your mind open, right? My kindergartner, they're teaching them, rock brain versus a sponge brain to, have a growth mindset. But I think it's also very interesting that you have devoted your life now to bridge these seemingly disparate worlds, right? Yeah. And so thank you for all this important work. So let's start off with some topics around more about the neuroscience part of things. Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit about one specific function of the brain that you have written a lot about, which is, the filtering of information and how that affects us.
Yes, right. And to me, that has been one of the most helpful insights I have had as a neuroscientist and a meditator in terms of understanding what the brain is really about. So what I discovered as I began to really search the function of the different aspects of our brain is that almost every single part of our brain serves a function to filter out a wider set of information that is coming into us and bombarding us every moment of our day. And when you think about it, we have amazing amounts of sensory information that are then actually canalized, I would say. They are restricted through just 5 senses. That's all we have. And so therefore, I only see one small part of the visual spectrum based on the visual pigments in my eyes. And I only hear a small part of the auditory spectrum for the same reason. And the same thing with touch, et cetera. So right there, my first filters are by 5 senses. And they really then restrict what's coming into my own observational abilities. But on top of that, we have another network that I think is very, very almost humorous that we have it, and it's obviously important for our lives. And that is what is called the mind wandering network, also called the default mode network, because it's our default mode every day. And this is a set of portions of the brain. One is in the medial prefrontal cortex, right at the front of the brain. Another one that's a major one is in the lateral part. It's called the posterior cingulate. And that is our narrative framework that is the source of our ego in our lives. It's the source of the stories that we tell ourselves all the time. And you may notice that as soon as I wake up in the morning, there is some narrative that begins to go on to talk about what I'm going to do in the day, what went wrong yesterday, what might go better today. That's what we're talking about. And that narrative is basically keeping out all the other sensory inputs when we're really focused on it. So I think the example I give is that I may be at certain points in my day walking down the street and I'm not aware of anything around me because I'm lost in my internal narrative for like 10 or 20 seconds. And then suddenly I'm aware again of what's going on. So the point is that these filters keep us from an expanded awareness. And I've only named 2 of them. There's a third one that is our language centers in the left side of our brain. Basically, if you look at the 2 halves of the brain, the left side, the language and linear thinking centers also tend to restrict us even more to linear thought processes, whereas the right side of the brain is interested in holistic perceptions and creativity and intuition. And in our Western age, we tend to turn that side off more as we focus on linear thinking and linear analysis. So what I've learned now is that this is a normal function in being a human in the world, because in fact, it is a protective function to keep us alert to what's going on in a small portion of physical reality, to keep us from, for example, in the old days, being eaten by a lion or being killed by something else, or falling off a cliff. So it's useful, but it restricts us immensely. And I think the interesting thing about meditative traditions is that they say what meditation is doing is beginning to turn down, for example, that default mode network and these other networks like the language linear processing networks, which allow us to open up to a wider awareness of reality. And when we turn these far enough down, we can begin to move into what we might call a sense of interconnection or unity awareness, or a sense of love and joy with all that is around us. We see it now in a more neutral and positive manner than we did before, when one thing seemed good and the other thing seemed bad. We see the wonder and the joy of the world around us.
Very interesting. So you're saying that even though this function of the brain keeps us, let's say, more functional in the modern context, right? Because we are not trying to process huge amounts of information all the time, and we can focus on a task at hand, but it still restricts us in some ways. Maybe, there's a way to go beyond that barrier. And what is your preferred way of going beyond that barrier? Or what would you recommend? How do we go beyond this?
Well, and I'm also going to say to those people from India that are in your audience that one way I've learned about these preferred methods is through certain practices from ancient texts in Kashmir of India. And it's actually been called Kashmir Shaivism is one name of it. And there's a particular author, a bit of a Gupta, and another one called Utpaladeva, who wrote texts in the 1000s, which really were at the core of what we need to do, because back then they also were exploring all of these things and teaching them to their students. And one is this: it is, see if you can find that space between the thoughts, or that space between sleeping and waking. And can you in that moment simply hold on to that a little bit longer and find that place of stillness? Now, other ways of doing that, of course, are through mantra repetition. And many of us have a mantra that we might use. And I want to say here that this is something I've been exploring more these days, because I find that, like anybody, I can have certain thoughts that get in my way. And I'll give you a humorous example. I live on the edge of a forest and I like to go walking there. But now there are lots of mountain bikers that also like to go bicycling there. And they're often in quote unquote my way, and I have to move aside. And I would have this negative thing going on in my head about, why are there so many bikers? And suddenly I thought, why don't I try repeating the mantra that I've been using for a number of years while I'm on my walks? And so as soon as I would get out on my walk, I would begin to repeat this mantra. And it's a mantra that really translated into English is, I honor the highest in myself and in everyone. And what I found is that by repeating that mantra very, very intently, in fact, even like mouthing the words to keep my focus on it, suddenly when a bicyclist came by, I simply performed a sweet dance where I would move aside, or the bicyclist would move aside, and I didn't feel any negativity at all. I was simply aware in the moment and responding appropriately without any thoughts. And I thought, well, that is powerful. And I've now discovered that if I keep practicing that through my day, other thoughts I've had, like maybe something my sister has done that has annoyed me and I want to go and tell her, would you stop doing that? Instead, I just began to repeat the mantra. And then it didn't seem to matter anymore what my sister was doing. It's like there was a place of neutral peace and tranquility that pervaded my day. And now these problems didn't matter anymore. They were no longer problems. So I think that's one example of what Utpaladeva was talking about that place between the thoughts where the thoughts go away. The second one that I actually really love too is the reminder that there are certain phrases we can say, which are things like, I am indeed all of this. I am one with everything. The essence of everything is the essence of me. And in Utpaladeva's writings, in fact, it's called the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karika, he says that if you repeat this again and again, what seems to happen is it actually basically destroys all of the other thoughts. And then this thought goes away as well, as soon as you get into a quiet place. So those are two of my practices that I really have found to be very powerful and transformative for me in terms of my own state of mind.
Very interesting. I think our listeners can definitely try that when they're stuck in traffic in on Indian roads, because there's a lot of that. So that's great to hear. And in fact, I think from my own personal experience as well, I think just different aspects of yoga helped me do exactly what you said. That things that were problems beforehand, I was able to let go, and peace moved in instead. Yeah. So that's a great spot to be in. So let's go a little further on neuroscience and really understand that what the current models of brain in modern neuroscience, they're unable to explain regarding your experience with meditation.
Right. So the theory of the brain that I had and of consciousness when I was a graduate student and a professor, and it still prevails in most neuroscience professors, is that our brain actually is the creator or the generator of our conscious experiences. And the reason that neuroscientists say that is that if you have a stroke to a particular part of the brain, then you typically lose that aspect of your awareness. For example, if you have a stroke to one particular area of your visual system, you will become blind in that particular area. So that's the way that neuroscientists look at things. But what happened to me when I had my first meditation experiences is that I began to feel things that couldn't be explained by my brain activity. I mean, for example, that sense of that unity awareness with everything around me. It's like, that's not what my senses were telling me, but I had this feeling of being one with other people around me, and in fact, with my entire environment, all the animals and the plants around me. And so I began then to do research on scientific studies that explored this phenomenon. And here is the funny thing that your readers might, or listeners may actually experience as well. I realized once I was curious about wondering whether consciousness could exist, in fact, beyond the brain, I found that there was a lot of research out there already on it, but I had ignored that research because I wasn't interested. So, for example, near-death experiences are one place where you see this, where scientists very carefully bring in everybody to a hospital network that has had cardiac arrest. Those that survive, they ask them, did anything unusual happen to you during that time of cardiac arrest when the brain is flatlined, there's no EEG? And they said that about 15% would say, oh, yes. And they would tell them a story about their consciousness leaving their body, hovering above the body in the recovery room or the operating room, watching all of the personnel around them, trying to help resuscitate them. And then sometimes moving on to another realm where they may have seen their deceased mother or father or relatives. And then coming back when the heart now is pumping again and getting back into the body. They often say it's difficult because their awareness is so expanded outside the body, they don't know how they're going to get it back into the confines of the body. And then they are there. And then when they come back to consciousness in the ICU, for example, they want to tell people about that. But the doctors don't want to hear it because the doctors don't believe it can be true. So what's beautiful is that now we have a number of studies like this showing that this is the case, and there's no way of explaining their absolute correct observation of everything that happened in the operating room, where they were clearly with no EEG, no brain activity at all. And that's what then convinces me that consciousness is more than the activity of my brain neurons.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I also want to share that, from the first time I took a course on Indian philosophy in my college days to more recently during my yoga teacher training, I always felt compelled to ask, so what is the scientific evidence of this? Needless to say, I loved science growing up, but that also made me dismissive about some of the prevalent, I would say, axioms in the Indian society, particularly, about soul and rebirth. And I share this because I feel like in our modern education system, we are conditioned to approach this way, right? So it's only now that I'm beginning to appreciate that, there are limitations to the modern scientific method. And as you very rightly said, you have experienced that personally. And for me also, I think the impact of yoga, I think the aha moment was the neural rewiring almost, that happens through the process.
Yeah.
So I think I can totally relate to what you just shared. So I think let's talk a little bit about, meditation now. So so meditation, it reduces the number of thoughts in our mind and their impact on our emotional state, right? Like we just discussed. It brings that, peace and calm and relaxation. And how does that relate to, the activity in the brain? Is it the same as reducing the activity in the brain? And what is the end goal of meditation?
Right. So you raise an interesting point. Certainly, as we meditate, we are quieting down the thoughts. And we're doing that, interestingly, through our intention. I love that word, intention. I think I was told it's sankalpa in Sanskrit, intention and attention. And by that, I mean that I have an intention now to keep my mind focused on my breath. And of course, that means I'm going to attend to focusing on the breath as one example. And what happens then is what we call our executive network, our executive attention system in our brain, which helps us determine where we want to go during the day, what we want to do, now is telling the rest of the brain, you need to be quiet and let me focus on the breath. And of course, as we all know, what happens is the thought comes up, you get distracted, but then your executive attention says, wait a minute, let me bring my attention back to the breath. When you do this over and over again during, say, 25 minutes of meditation, what begins to happen is that the brain circuitry literally begins to change so that those pathways from your executive system down to, for example, your emotional centers in your midbrain becomes very, very strong, and it begins to inhibit those impulsive centers from being active all the time. And therefore, the more you do it, the stronger those connections become, and therefore the easier it becomes to actually keep yourself in a state of equanimity. So something comes up that's a real challenge, it brings you anxiety, things are going wrong. But if you've been meditating, the impulse to perhaps yell at someone or be really anxious or angry doesn't happen, because the executive system is keeping the emotional centers quiet, letting you pause for a moment before you decide what to do, which might be a more positive response than to get really, really agitated.
Very interesting. So it's the response versus reaction, right? Yes. That we talk about. So, but what do you think is the end goal of meditation?
Well, for me, the end goal is to actually be in that state of equanimity all of the time. And, it doesn't mean that one is detached. I think this is the interesting Western version of their worry about meditation, is that you will become detached and cool toward everyone, but it's not that. For me, what it is that I have two ways of perceiving at the same time. One is, for example, if I have a friend that, for example, has a serious illness, I can go down into what I would call the well with them and feel compassion for them completely. And at the same time, there's a part of me that is the witness that is watching it all with equanimity, so that I don't get drowned in my own feelings and I can actually help them. And in fact, Richard Davidson, one of the researchers in meditation, said something very beautiful. He said, the beauty about meditation is that it increases our compassion, but it's a compassion that is not just getting overwhelmed by someone else's suffering, but a compassion that leads us to want to alleviate the person's suffering. We go out there to try to do whatever we can to bring them back to a state of well-being.
Very interesting. I think I also heard recently that this detachment does not mean indifference, right? So that's where some of the confusion arises. Exactly. It's not lazy indifference, it is more empathy, but from a place of equanimity, which would empower you to do something about it.
Exactly, yes.
Right. So I think, so let's talk about, what can be the impact of this, in the modern world. What if, the more people in the world were meditating? Will our world look different? And and that also kind of brings me to my kind of next thought in this, that what is consciousness and what does it look like or feel like? It's a very sometimes it can be an abstract word.
You're absolutely right. And I think that the word we use for it in English often is our awareness. And so what we're saying is that when we are in a state of meditation, we're in a state of pure awareness without the thoughts interfering with what we're perceiving. And that place often has a sense of peace, a sense of joy. Ananda is the word we often use again in Sanskrit, that comes with the sense of pure presence. I am right here in the moment. seeing and experiencing things as they are without judgment, just watching and being. So that's the way I look at it. And I can usually tell when a thought pops up and is distracting me versus when I'm in that place of stillness. It's not that I'm in stillness all the time, but I'm more aware of the thoughts and realizing that I can try to reduce their distraction. So that would be the first way of thinking about it. And the other thing I want to note is that most people that I talk to say that when they practice meditation over a period of time, not only do they have more compassion for other human beings, but really for all beings on the planet, and in fact, for the health of the planet Earth. And they now feel a sense of love for everyone and for the Earth, and they feel a responsibility to take care of it, and not just for themselves, for everyone and for future generations. And I think that's the power of meditation, that if we begin to teach it, for example, in the school system, teach it to our governing bodies, like our legislators in our countries, that little by little, one person at a time, we will begin to change the way we perceive the world from that materialist perspective where I want all the material things I can get because there's a limited amount of them and therefore you can't have them, to I love you equally to me. We're all part of the same essence. And I really want to give you as much as I can in terms of helping you thrive and helping the planet and the animals on it thrive.
Very interesting. I mean, I think it does sound utopian, I have to say, from just being situated in the modern society where it's really unfortunate the amount of conflict and, you know, violence that we still witness even today.
Right. And here's something else, just because we are having a number of people from an Indian background talking, I have also done research to look at cases suggestive of reincarnation. And there are now many research studies in the West, and often looking at people from India, children who have had experiences of being someone else before they came back to this world. And there's a lot of evidence that this is a real, actual fact. And what we also talk about is young souls versus old souls. And again, this is more a meditative thing. There's no way you could prove this at all, but I believe that the people that are in this world causing violence and conflict are the young souls, and they haven't yet had time to learn about their connection with everyone else. And there have always been young souls on this planet. And for me, it's a matter of accepting them and in a certain sense, loving them for who they are and hoping that I can help them in some way learn that they're more than just that individual separate being, that they really are connected to everyone else, and therefore they can love and appreciate others.
Beautifully put, beautifully put. In fact, it reminds me of this, you know, very famous mantra from Nirvana Shatkam, right? It says, Chidanand Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham.
Yes.
I'm the form of consciousness and bliss. I'm the eternal Shiv. And it sounds like a very powerful mantra to me. And I think I'm going to take up chanting of this mantra.
Oh, and I love it too. So in my own tradition, we chant that and we have a recording of it. And I will often like sing that out because I think it's such a beautiful reminder of who we really are. Yes,
I thought this might be one of your favorite mantras too, because you like Kashmir Shaivism, right?
Yes.
That's wonderful. And so in one of your talks, I also heard that even non-living objects have consciousness, and that's kind of your belief, or you know, that's what you realized. So if that is true, like, how does it change our relationship to these objects or the world around us? Does it allow us to do something different? How does it further our understanding about the reality of our existence? Because again, coming from a, you know, situated in the modern society, that does seem like a distant concept.
It's interesting. And I agree. I think that some neuroscientists say, oh, only those things that have life force, like prana, actually have it. But others say prana is in everything. And it's just a different level of organization of the prana. And I think that I come from, again, with Kashmir Shaivism, they also have a Western counterpart that they call idealism. It could be analytic idealism, but idealism is exactly like what we mean about, from this Indian point of view, that basically consciousness is infinite, an infinite force full of love and full of joy, and it simply creates all of the different entities that are actually part of it as ways of learning and exploring who it is. And so you now have, in fact, this is a beautiful way I love it expressed by Bernardo Castro, a scientist that is looking into this. He says, it's as if the infinite force, we might call it God, whatever word we want for it, by wanting to know itself, has decided to actually experience what you could call, let's see, a multiple identity disorder. You know, when somebody has it's schizophrenia and one moment they are this personality, and another moment they're that personality, he says that this is voluntarily gone into by infinite consciousness so that it is all of us, and we are all the alter personalities, all of the different personalities looking at it from tiny points of view and looking at each other and saying, I'm right and you're wrong. So the same way with the rocks, it's like they also have consciousness. It's just a very, very coarse form of consciousness compared to this higher form. And I'm also aware of a wonderful saint from India, Ramana Maharshi. And I think he often said that Arunachala, the mountain that he was near, it's not that Shiva lived there, that mountain was Shiva, that mountain was infinite awareness. And I like to think that. I live again in this beautiful country in Arizona, where I have a big red rock right behind me. And I often think of that rock as consciousness in its own way, that it has a power. It is a power spot for me. And I actually can become quieter when I am near that beauty of that rock.
Very interesting. I think it almost brings to my mind the whole, idol worship that happens in India. And again, as a, high school science student, I always wondered, how does that work? And I think what you're saying is that if you can see consciousness, you can, in everything, you can see consciousness in a piece of rock, and that's a form of God, and for your devotion. Yeah, that's wonderful. And so I mean, I think let's talk about this phrase infinite awareness for a couple of minutes. So that's the title of your book. And how would you connect everything that we just talked about, consciousness and brain and the right half of the brain, and, what can we do to get a taste or a sneak preview into the infinite awareness that you have talked about in your book?
Yes, and I love that term, infinite awareness, infinite consciousness, because I think for me, it's the goal for all of us to be able to feel that interconnection with everyone around us, with the birds, with the animals, because it brings us joy. It brings us this ananda, this sense of peace and love. And I think that, first of all, I want to say that the reason I wrote that book was because, having been a materialist neuroscientist and then discovering in meditation this vaster reality that was so beautiful, I wanted to truly integrate it in my life by exploring consciousness in terms of all the research that has been done on it. And so I realized as I was writing it not just for myself, but for all the people who might read it, so that they, if they were curious and had similar questions, might learn from me, and therefore perhaps explore inside their own inner laboratory about meditation and then the research that is out there. And so I think that the goal, obviously, is simply to be able to be in that state of equanimity and joy, no matter what is going on around us. At this moment, we have this war in the Ukraine that is just frightening to many people. And I realize what meditation allows me to do is to let go of my fear and try to be present, so that I can think of ways I might help, rather than simply contract in fear. And also understand that this has been going on for all of humanity's history. And how can I help perhaps at least reduce our sense of conflict in the people around the world?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, I think even though we understand it's going on for all of humanity, I mean, I think it's just still saddening. And as you mentioned, this whole concept of young souls, I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, and kind of can bring us a little bit of peace in all the chaos that's surrounding us right now. I do want to conclude our conversation with this beautiful mantra from Bhagavad Gita, actually.
Yes.
Just half of the verse here. Avinashi tu tad vidhi yen sarvam idam tatam. So know that by which all this universe is pervaded is indeed indestructible.
Beautiful. Yes.
Yes, and I think that's what you're talking about in terms of the larger consciousness that pervades the entire universe and everything that surrounds us.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Marjorie, for this enlightening conversation. And we are very excited that you're doing this work, and because I think it does bring a whole new section of the society to actually pay attention to this. People like me, I have to say. Now I'm a convert, but it took me a while to get there. So thank you again, and it was wonderful to have you join us today. And we hope to talk to you again in future.
Thank you so much, Shruti. I really enjoy talking with you as well.
Thank you.